Hello and welcome back to the studio. I saw you in the Zoom rooms. Unfortunately, I could not be everywhere. So for me also, this summary and overview of what happened in all the rooms is really great. And I hope for all of you, I mean, you could not divide yourself either in 5 people. So now let us have the wrap up of the Zoom rooms. So, our hosts are going to tell us what happened in the room, what the people wanted to know, what did they tell us, were there new ideas, new initiatives coming up, maybe collaborations that were happening in the rooms. We don't know. We want to know, and we're going to start with Irina Albita, the co-founder and co-CEO of FilmChain. What happened in your room?
Fantastic to see you again, AC, and I feel so energized. It was an amazing experience, also for Maria and I, speaking with an amazing group of people around about FilmChain and some of the challenges and also opportunities they see in the space of recoupment and collection account management. We got some incredible insights. If anything, the fantastic group that we had in a room indicated some of the challenges that they have in the past seen with in their work with collection account management companies, as well as with recoupment. For example, they've said that it's very difficult for filmmakers to understand where revenues are coming from. They recognize that there is an interest in performance data about how well your film did, not just for private financiers, but also for film institutes and public financiers. We discussed, for example, an incredible sort of case study about a public financier, Creative Scotland, that since the beginning of this year is requesting all of their documentaries to have a collection agent in place, no matter how small the budget is, in order to have this type of insights around performance, as well as a couple of interesting opportunities for the future. Such as interest in also getting statements around how many people have viewed your title, how promotions have worked on the market, and something that was incredibly sticking with us, which is predictions on where to spend your marketing budget, so that particularly documentary filmmakers that don't have so much marketing budgets to spend them in the right places and not in the wrong places. It's been also incredibly exciting to be able to share the documentary offer that FilmChain is putting out there as our commitment for the documentary space, and we're really excited to engage with as many of you as possible and throughout the day today. So thank you very much all. I'm buzzing.
This is fantastic. This is great. I already heard that there would be some follow-up emails, Irina. So this is very good. So that was FilmChain, How Transparency Builds Trust. And we're going to move now to the next workshop, which was by Patreon, Ronnie Krieger, General Manager Europe of Patreon. Ronnie, are you back with us?
Yes, I am.
So what happened in your room?
It was a wonderful session. My colleague G and I, we were talking to a really interesting group of people all over Europe, from Greece and even Canada and all places. And it was interesting to see that everybody kind of felt that their case was unique. But in the end of it, pretty much everyone talked about the same issue as their number one issue, which was mainly access to funding, which was difficult in many of these cases. And that obviously is one of the key elements where Patreon comes in and can be a very effective way. Another important learning, which I kind of knew but was reinstated again, is the project-based mindset of the film industry, where every single project is seen as an individual project independent from the next. And the idea of them as people that are continuously being creative over the period of their life, ideally, didn't come into play. And it was still pretty much, I'm doing this project and I'm finding a way to fund this project right now. And then when I'm done with this one, I'm starting the next project. So this really is an interesting perspective that comes with membership, is that you can get away from the individual project to interesting continuous life journeys of creative processes. Because in the end of the day, whether you do a documentary about sport and then another one about animals or a certain location afterwards, it's still you doing these storytellings and these documentaries or movies. So it's very interesting for communities to follow you and build around that. A common misperception as well discussed in the group was, then I need to create a lot of content that currently doesn't exist. And I brought the example again of the million stories that follow the process of creating the one main story, all the people that are involved in the process of creating the stories that, if they're lucky, are going to be found 5 minutes after the movie ends in the end reels, a small name following 200 other names. And all of them are part of the creative process of the production and can play a significant role in the storytelling. So I hope that we'll follow up with many of the interesting people in that group and help them create and fund interesting stories along the way and build communities that make them less dependent on other platforms and rules and algorithms and all of that.
Great. Thank you very much, Ronnie. I'm sure there will be follow-up. And we're going to move to the next workshop, which was by Doc Society. And we had Jessica Edwards, the Director of Impact and Partnerships of Doc Society. And it was all about climate storytelling. Jessica, how did it go?
Wow, it was a fascinating conversation and there was so much ground to cover. I feel that an hour was nowhere near enough. We had a great group of filmmakers and cultural change makers who brought lots of experiences to the conversation. We kicked off talking about possibilities that could be reimagined within the cultural sector. Ideas that came up here were around transsectoral collaboration and better funding for the humanities and the arts in particular to collaborate with other types of sectors. We talked about ways that filmmakers could collaborate better with filmmakers in other parts of the world and the opportunities that need to be created so that bridges can be built between different creatives around the world. We talked about the need to integrate stories in other sectors beyond just arts. So the integration of storytelling within science, for example, and the power that it may have then for science to resonate even more profoundly with individuals. We moved on then to talk about opportunities and barriers. There seems to be a number of barriers, particularly within broadcasters, around, how they conceive of climate storytelling, the way in which they think about, short form content, because very clearly we felt there was a lot of opportunity around short form content to kind of have impact with audiences, but there are very few slots for those types of films to be made. And film, there's a barrier with speed because, if it takes 3 years to make a film, things may have changed and moved on. And again, the opportunity around short form helps to kind of transcend that barrier. And the other thing that came up in that part of the conversation was the barrier regarding co-productions with countries and other parts of the world, but actually the opportunity to have more appropriate and more efficient co-productions that would enable stories to be made with and about frontline communities. We moved then to talk about types of stories, which was fascinating. One of the colleagues in the room talked a lot about the opportunities for storytelling that incorporate mythology, and the fact that climate change kind of is almost too big to fit into a kind of language and framework that we have at the moment. And so that was something that Arnie was was thinking a lot about in a book that he has written called On Time and Water, which sounds fascinating. And then we ended our conversation around kind of what future cultural resilience could look like. And clearly there's a lot here that could be kind of unpacked, but innovations in distribution, particularly at grassroots level, it felt like in the conversations that there are having better and more profound distribution at kind of grassroots community level really opens up possibilities to kind of engage and to kind of create impact with audiences who may be hard to reach. And similarly, around the redistribution of resources and opportunities provides a kind of more resilient cultural sector ultimately. And that comes through kind of more sustainable approaches towards production. A lot of ground covered, and so much more to unpack, but it was a conversation starter, and I'm sure we'll all go away with lots and lots to think about.
Absolutely. It is a conversation start, and there will be some follow-up, not only per mail, obviously, but I hope that everybody is going to take action after these workshops. Thank you so much, Jessica. And we're going to move now to Toni Bell, of the Programmers of Color Collective. And you had also, together with Lana Garland, a great workshop. I was also a couple of minutes. I was everywhere and nowhere, unfortunately. So tell me what I missed after I left.
Yeah, it was great that you popped in. You were moving about. Thank you so much for being there. So Lana and I had a great discussion with our filmmakers and programmers as well. Berlin was definitely well represented. There are a lot of folks in Berlin who were in our group. Some of the things that came out of our discussion were around the self-reflection piece, learning how to interrogate one's own biases, and really questioning when you are going into a film project, particularly as from the filmmaker perspective, what you are bringing to the table, and being honest about that. We also discuss the fact that there are these terms such as decolonize and diversity and equity that are used frequently within the documentary film industry, and how to a certain extent some of that language has been defanged as it's kind of being co-opted by the mainstream, and how it's very important to be clear about how we are defining those terms, and when you're using those terms in discussions with other people, making sure that you are actually on the same page, but also looking at how those terms translate into actionable items that lead to change, whether those changes be small or large. We also had a lot of people who are really interested in the questions around distribution, particularly when they're working with larger distributors. And a lot of people gave examples where certain films that made it into larger film festivals or got picked up by a larger distributor actually were able to negotiate as part of their distribution deal, making sure that those films screened at particular festivals that were focused on a particular ethnic group, or also screened at did they were able to incorporate community screenings as part of that deal. So one lesson that filmmakers take from that is when they are at the point of getting distribution, making that part of the discussion process and the negotiating process in order to get their film out to a wider audience, and also being able to sell that idea to distributors that this actually increases the reach of the film. We also had a lot of folks who are putting in some really great resources in the chat. Particularly Timba put in a link to the Imaginative protocols for working with Indigenous filmmakers. And this is something that was developed by the Imaginative team in Toronto. For those of you who know, Imaginative is a film festival that focuses on Indigenous creators and filmmakers, and they actually have a set of protocols that are outlined in this really great document that detail the ways that those of us who aren't Indigenous go into community, if we're thinking about going into communities to work with Indigenous folks or filmmakers, how to make those relationships equitable. We also had great discussions about the programmer side, because a lot of the programmers in the group had questions about how they can make sure they're making equitable choices when they are programming. And one way to do that is to make that part of the submission requirement. So when a person submits their film, if they're doing a film that's not a community of their own, asking questions about that. Asking if for example, they're doing a film about folks with disabilities. Do they have folks with disabilities on that crew? And now we're living in a world now where no one can say they can't find a particular filmmaker of a particular ilk because their database is out there. So browngirls.mafia has a database if you're looking for women and non-binary folks of color. There's Forward Docs, which is a organization for filmmakers with disabilities, is working on a database, so you can find filmmakers to fill that bill. Also, there's a Queer Producers Collective. There's ADOCS, which is Asian American documentary for Asian American documentary filmmakers. So if you're looking for folks of that persuasion, you can find folks, filmmakers like that, but also just doing general Google search. So if you are a filmmaker from Europe and you want to do a project that's set in Africa, reach out to organizations like Documentary Africa, because they can connect you with content creators there as well. Another issue that was brought up is what happens when a person of color is invited to be on a project that's run by a predominantly white crew, and some of the things that need to be considered when thinking about taking up that position. I know last year, with everything that happened here in the United States with the murder of George Floyd and the protests and the worldwide outcry around that, a lot of filmmakers of color in the United States were getting calls, being inundated with calls to be on projects. And that is good because that work is needed. But one thing that needs to be asked is do you actually have any power on that project? Or do they want just a diverse body, or do they also want your diverse perspective? So just being very cognizant about that. And also how filmmakers are trying to negotiate working with distributors when there's this expectation that they're supposed to do a certain type of film in order to get their film with a particular distributor, particularly when we're talking about situations in Europe where you're dealing with co-productions. But not only that, but if your film is not the stereotypical poverty porn or trauma porn, but the distributor wants that, how do you deal with that? And that can be really daunting because unfortunately there are these systems in place, but there are more outlets for people to create that authentic work, and it's important to look for those things. So that was a wrap up. So thank you for everyone who participated. It was a great conversation.
Yes, and thank you for mentioning the tokenization problem. Definitely, I can tell you. Anyway, so this is really good. Thank you so much to have shared that with us. And we have now Ethnocine, and I call Miasarah Lai, the co-founder of Ethnocine Collective. Miasarah, I was only also a couple of minutes at your workshop. Sound great. Great slides. So what was the life around it? What was discussed, and what do you want to tell us to finish this series?
Mm-hmm. Nice to see everybody again. Well, can't see you, but I wish I could. So for our session, it was called Decolonizing Documentary Film, and that was from the perspective of filmmakers. So thinking through, as a filmmaker, what can you do throughout the entire process, from conception, development, pre-production, production, post-production, distribution? What techniques could you use to consider how to work against the colonial residue that comes from the history of documentary filmmaking from anthropology. So we gave a lot of prompts for self-reflection about what to think about in terms of filmmaking, the filmmaking ethos when going into it. Rather than just considering the filmmaking process as something just to create the final product of the film, how can we consider the entire process to work towards maybe activism, or to work towards healing within a community, or work towards redistributing resources to the community that you're featuring. And also considering if you are an outsider going into another person's community. I think there's this wonderful quote from this incident that happened at True False, where a student activists in the University of North Carolina were featured without consent. They said that nothing about us without us is for us. So in considering that quote, how can you activate people within the community to be a part of your team and be a part of the process of the film of your film? Take into consideration, like, why would someone want to be a part of your documentary? Most people that say yes to being a part of a documentary, they don't truly understand what that means. So getting consent along the way, checking in all along the way to see how they're feeling about being part of this project with you. What other things we talked about? Toni did a really great job of covering this, but we did talk about, who are you hiring? We live in a media saturated world. There are filmmakers all over the world. Everyone that has skills. So there's a bunch of databases that you can reach out to, or even leverage Facebook. Despite whatever feelings that you might have about Facebook, there are many groups to find professionals throughout the world. Also, would encourage the reading of Beyond Empathy by Sonia Childress about the limitations of the framework of empathy. We don't need you to humanize humans. We don't need you to give voice to the voiceless. Just pass the mic over. And some other, I think, this quote that I really love so much, that I feel like really forces you to think about the systemic nature of white supremacy. Remember, white supremacy is not a shark. It is the water that we're all swimming in, that we all constantly have to navigate every part of the process. So what tools are at our disposal to work against the waters of colonialism? How can we create dams? How can we create boats, hovercrafts? It's an overwhelming process. If you feel overwhelmed, then you're on the right track. Just connect with other people, because you have blind spots. We all do. It's about connecting with other people and aligning yourself with people that can consider the things that you don't see. And so we had filmmakers. We had brand new filmmakers that were featuring their work at this conference. We had academics. It was mostly filmmaker centric.
Okay, well, fair enough. It is also here a documentary conference where we have a lot of diverse audiences also. And I am glad that you are actually completing this series, Miasarah. I attended a part of the workshop. I found it really great, especially this the way you had to do through the entire process was very empowering and very interesting to see, like from the beginning, from the pre-production up to the production processes. Thank you so much to have been with us. Thank you to all 10 of you. There were 2 of you in each rooms to lead the workshops. I know that the audiences liked it very much and they learned a lot, and I think it was a very good way to complete this conference on this 5th day.